James is trying to do rear delt flies, and what is he actually doing? He's working his upper back. He's not even using the rear delts. He's struggling with the weight. He's moving around. He's distracted. He's not even focused on the movement he's doing. If he was, maybe he could notice that he's not even feeling it in his delts. He's trying to get rounder shoulders, bigger shoulders, but clearly he doesn't want it hard enough. His friends are in the background, and they're equally as clueless. They're mimicking other exercises he's shown them, which are just horrible ways to hit a muscle by not hitting the muscle. They have no real understanding of what's going on. Anatoly executes any rear delt movement because to him it doesn't actually matter which one he does, because he does it with perfect form. He does it in such a way where he is biasing the rear delt. He's composed and confident, and when he walks into the gym and his favorite machine for training the rear delt is taken, he doesn't care. He knows there's tons of other ways he can hit it, and he goes and hits it. Now when people like James look over to Anatoly, they just see a guy moving heavy weight, and they accuse him of ego lifting, when he's probably the only one in the gym who's actually training properly. Just because he's going to failure, they get a bit confused of what's actually good, and they start throwing around names. My friend's workout program was so bad. He had me doing reverse pec deck to train the rear delts. I had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea how to target the rear delt. I didn't even know it was for the rear delts. I had no idea what all of this was. I just joined the gym. I was brand new. How do I even know what feeling the rear delt is like? And I would just do it. And I would do it in such a way where I'm basically just retracting my scapula. That's kind of all I was doing. I'm also going excessively back. I'm definitely not working my rear delts. And do you think I ever felt my rear delt? No. It would be 1.5 years after till I actually managed to feel my rear delt for the first time. Can you imagine that? I was doing movements that were supposed to train my rear delts, but because I had no idea what I was doing, and the movements weren't that great in itself, I wasn't even able to feel it. That's what triggered my realization. I couldn't even feel the muscle. So clearly, the exercises I was doing weren't working well. And plus, my physique kind of showed it too. Like, my rear delts were lagging. They weren't doing too well. And to add insult to injury, the kind of exercises that could, like, somewhat train the rear delt, like a row with like a decent amount of elbow bend, whatever you want to call it, I wasn't doing them. I was focusing on the pull downs, the close grip rows, and pretty much everything I was doing was done in such a way where it's having my elbows locked into my torso, or, coming up. I wasn't really hitting the upper back much either, apart from my rear delt stuff, which is a bit stupid looking back on it, because sure, I should have been hitting upper back too, but that's not what my rear delt work was for, right? And so here's a quick actionable step for you. I want you to close your eyes, and I want you to actually think about what the rear delt does. Now, the rear delt's function is literally to move your upper arm back, and its range of motion is pretty short. When you start overextending that, you're not actually using the rear delt. It doesn't get shortened anymore. And so I want you to picture that. Picture the movement of it completely isolated, so nothing else is working. Picture the muscle fibers contracting, moving on its own, and have this mental image. This is what you're going to refer back to in your workouts. This is what's going to dial you in and go, maybe that movement's not working the way I thought it did. That is your saving grace, as it will. Now, the thing about rear delts is they're not actually bystanders. It's not something where we do our normal movements and we'll get enough stimulus, like with front presses. Rows aren't really going to be working the rear delts well, especially if you're doing rows properly, because you're trying to focus on your back. And the rear delt may be on the back of you, but it's not a back muscle. Just like the hamstrings may be on the back of you, but they're not a back muscle. So when you're hitting your upper back, or even your lats, whatever back exercise you're doing, you may be hitting the rear delts, but you're not hitting them properly, right? Like, you wouldn't rely on shoulder press for lateral delts, even though I'm sure it does good. And to be honest, shoulder press for lateral raises, I'll make a video on this one day, but that is so much more beneficial. But that's going to be so much better than any sort of rear delt activation in a row. It just isn't gonna work. And some of you may think, focusing on the rear delts, giving them special attention. It's just a trend. It's just because a few people did it and they had like some cool looking new exercises on TikTok, and then it took off and everyone started doing it and they could feel it. No. Special attention for the rear delts happens because pretty much everyone has lacking rear delts. Lateral delts, who isn't doing lateral raises? In fact, people are doing too much for their lateral delt. Front delt, come on, no one needs to do that. And you'll still see people doing front raises. I mean, there's people in my gym who are doing front raises, and I haven't ever seen them do a rear delt movement. Apart from the stupid rear delt reverse pec deck when they're not even targeting their rear delts properly. Many people get it wrong. I mean, anytime we're actually moving the scapula in a rear delt movement, we can guarantee that the actual back is taking over, that the back is the thing that's going to control the movement. It's like doing a lat pull down for your biceps. Like, yeah, the biceps are going to be used. Are they going to be used effectively? No. And so when you are doing reverse, and so when you are doing movements where you're trying to target your rear delts, please minimize back movement. Keep your shoulders at the same point, and your upper arm is what moves. And just stop when it actually gets to the end of the rear delts range. There's no reason to go beyond that. Like, what benefit could there possibly be to using other muscles when you're trying to isolate one or bias one or whatever? None. That's it. There's no extra benefit. There's only a cost to actually training. And so please learn the proper movement, and it may be difficult at first. I don't like recommending high reps. I think it's stupid. I think it causes too much damage. But for learning how to hit a muscle you're struggling to hit, like the rear delts, I would recommend actually moving the volume up a bit. I would recommend higher reps. And that's just, 15 to 20. You can do it like that, and then the next set do it properly where it's like 10 reps max. But try and create some sort of way to actually make sure you're doing the movement properly, because you're not really getting anything out of training your upper back when you're trying to hit something else. It's just dumb. So here's like a full plan of action you can follow if you want to start actually training the rear delts and not completely other muscles, which probably get enough volume, because most people do too much volume. Apart from you guys, I know you guys don't do too much volume. I know I've convinced you into the mindset of kind of having like mid volume, where it's like 10 weekly sets per muscle, and you're going to failure on it because that's what actually matters. Anyway, step 1 is going to be technique. Technique is king, as I like to say. So start with perfecting your form. Ensure that you're actually not engaging your upper back. That cannot be the predominant mover. Sure, there might be a teeny tiny bit of retraction or protraction. Maybe you can't control it. Maybe it feels slightly more natural that way. I can accept that. But you need to be actually working your rear delts. You can't have cope in like 5 months where you're like, Fletcher, I followed your advice and your rear delts didn't grow. And then I'm like, okay, send me a video of your form. And they send me a video of them like protracting and retracting their scapula to like the maximum amount. And they're like, oh, but I'm going to stretch my rear delts that way. Like, that doesn't even make sense. If you want to stretch your rear delts, then you can have your upper arm move, but that doesn't have to have anything to do with your scapula. Like, imagine you're like, oh, I'm stretching my biceps as much as possible. And then I see you, like, doing a backflip, and I'm like, what even is that? Like, that's how absurd it is. And I know it's a pretty... I know it's a pretty strange comparison, but that is the absurdity that I hear when someone says that to me. And for step 2, you got to select rear delt moves. Obviously, if you want to grow something, you have to do an exercise which isolates it, when usually it's not the predominant mover. So we don't have to like isolate the chest, because the chest is going to be the thing that fails first. But we have to isolate the triceps because the chest fails before the triceps, and so we have to work on triceps individually. That sort of thing. So pick just one rear delt exercise at first and get really, really good at it. And then once you've mastered that, you can incorporate other things in. It's always good to have a couple in your like toolbox, even if they're not as good, just because there could be that one day where you come in and someone's like using the cable machine you want to use, everyone's on the cables, and you're like, pfft. And then for once, the pec deck machine, which normally people are like ego lifting for their like chest, for once that's free, and you're like, okay, I'm going to commit a grave sin and I'm going to use the rear delt. I'm going to use the reverse fly for it. That's okay. but try and focus on the good things, especially if you want to grow. Now, step 3 is going to be consistency. Consistency is obviously key, and so keep up. Like, don't switch it out. You know, if you're bored of it, it's a bit of a different thing because you just have to cope. You just have to push through. Things are going to get boring. So what? But don't ever have the thing where it's like, oh, I'm really tired. I had a really long back day and I'm just going to skip this one. Like, no. And if you start doing that, if the rear delts are a big issue, put them at the beginning. Prioritize them. Like, I don't want you to start skipping them just because they come at last, like people will do with calves. Although I really enjoy training calves, so it never really happens to me. But you're training it for a reason. If you didn't want rear delts, then why would you even do the rear delt movement? Why would you click on this video? Like, that's proof enough. If you got to this stage of it too, that's proof that you actually care about your rear delts. So don't do some BS. Oh, I don't care about the rear delts. I'm just gonna skip it for today. I'm sure it got enough carryover volume from my other movements. Like, you're just lying to yourself at that point and you're listening to a bad part of yourself. And so step 4 is also going to be reassess form. I love preaching this, but record yourself. If you're in a lucky scenario where you can film yourself shirtless, I would recommend that, because the best way to actually see if you're retracting and protracting excessively is by seeing yourself retract and protract excessively. Of course, that might not always be the case, but having something which is skin tight or something that's kind of a lighter color, I tend to see that you're able to actually like see the muscles engage better through that sort of thing. The darker something gets, the easier it is for the kind of definition to be hidden. I don't know why. It's probably something to do with the penetration of like the color. I don't even know. I'm not really a colorist or a clovologist or whatever they're called these days. Anyway, so step 5 is going to be to measure progress. Now, a great way you can do this is to just take photos of your rear delts, and that's probably going to be the best way to see. I would recommend doing without a pump, because a pump is going to make a huge difference, and something as simple as the snack you had before the gym or the amount of salt you had in the day could change that. But when you're like untrained and you're fresh and you've just woken up, there's no real way of being able to say like, oh, maybe I did some sleepwalking in my sleep and I just spammed like this in my sleep because I was like being chased and I sleepwalk. Like there's none of that silly nonsense is going on, so you should be fine from like it being on a standalone point. Anyway, if this guide gave you a sort of fresh perspective, share it to someone who does not know how to hit rear delts, because no one knows how to hit rear delts properly. So please give it to someone that you know is struggling with this, and so that you can help them. Perfecting form is a real journey, so don't be discouraged because it might take a little bit. It's not going to be the first time. Like, no one goes in and benches 2 plates on their first day. So just keep at it, and eventually we will master the art of being able to hit our rear delts.